Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Learn with Jason. Today on the show, we're bringing back Brandon Roberts. Brandon, how you doing?
Hey, I'm good, Jason. Glad to be back. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm happy to have you here. I am dealing with a little bit of audio lag today, so I apologize to everybody in the chat and to you for having to put up. It looks like I'm doing about 2 seconds, so I'm going to do my best to not stomp all over the conversation today. Um, But so for folks who aren't familiar with your work, didn't see your previous episode, do you want to give us a little bit of a background on who you are, what you're about?
Yeah, I'm Brandon Roberts. I work as a DevRel engineer at Appwrite. Like I said, I came on the show previous time and I talked about state management with NGRX and Angular. So that was a pretty fun episode, and yeah, glad to be back here to share again.
Yeah, I can't wait. I think this is going to be a really fun one because we are going to be talking about building apps, building backends. So can you maybe just elevator pitch for us? What is Appwrite?
Yeah, so Appwrite is a backend as a service. That's the elevator pitch there. Backend as a service. It's all open source. It's self-hosted. If you're familiar with Firebase and that sort of project, it's similar to that. So fully 100% open source. We call it a 100% open source alternative to Firebase is a good way to say it. But yeah, it's self-hosted. It gives you a lot of things out of the box, and I'm sure we'll kind of get into some of those. But database being one of them, and authentication and some other things. But runs as a set of Docker services. So you can run it on your machine or anywhere you can run Docker, you can basically run this. So yeah, you can get it running high, and running on your own stack is one of the things because it's all driven through that kind of that kind of tech. So yep.
Nice. And so when we're talking about an open source alternative to Firebase is conjures up a pretty powerful image. We think I think people
Hmm.
reach Firebase for all sorts of problems, and so it's exciting to have an open source version of that because I think we're all we want it, right? Everybody loves open
Hmm.
source. Um, so I think one of the things that always helps me is just to start kind of thinking through like where does a particular piece of technology shine. So
Yeah.
if I'm coming to Appwrite, what's in your opinion an ideal use case of Appwrite? What am I going to build that's really going to show off the best of it?
Mhm. Yeah, I think that if you're for Appwrite, I think it's a few things. If you're wanting to manage users or store data in a database and have store files, there's a collection of things that you could use for Appwrite. But like I said, anything with user management, we you could think of I guess a simplified example would be building a part of Netflix. Maybe Netflix itself is, of course, a really complex application, but it has some of those core things that you could use to build something like that, as far as authentication, user management, storing data, storing images, and having that kind of real time access to it. So, with that kind of foundation there, it kind of bridges that gap to get you up and running quickly in something that you want to, a lot of things that you want to build that kind of have those user interactions or user flows.
Nice. Yeah. Um, And so I know the chat's calling out that I'm having some audio sync issues, and I do apologize about that. I'm trying to figure out what's going on with those. Um,
Mhm.
but I think we might just have to live with them today. Um, so yeah, I mean that is always a kind of a really interesting problem, right? Is figuring out what's the right tool for the job. And so when you're talking about
Mhm.
something like a Netflix, and the things that you can build inside of that, so one of the things that you're bringing up here is this idea of like admin dashboards, kind of like I'm a user, I need to be logged in, I need to access
Hmm.
to my things, as well as public things. Um, that's so that is honestly one of the things that I think is most intimidating. I was just talking about this yesterday, where when people who are new to development, when they first start up,
Hmm.
it's very easy to see the first couple of like steps on the road. You write some HTML, you see the page update, you're like, oh man, I'm a wizard. I can make the computer do whatever I want. And then you do some CSS and you go, oh man, I can make this look however I want. That's amazing. And then you start doing JavaScript, and JavaScript's a little more abstract. And then you want to
Hmm.
do your ambitious app idea, and almost everybody lands on, I want to build an app where people can log in. And the
Hmm.
gap between I'm going to edit this HTML and see something change on screen, and I'm going to have an app that somebody can log into and have a user account, like it's just an enormous and very demoralizing gap to have to cross, right? And what I think is interesting about tools like Appwrite is that it feels like that gap is narrowing. It's like you still have to learn how to use the JavaScript and how to do those things, but
Hmm.
you're not thinking so much about like storing user sessions or validating tokens or the really complicated stuff that comes in with trying to do this sort of work. So have you like are you seeing people using Appwrite as a way to learn?
Yeah, I definitely think it is being used as a way to learn. Like you said, there's a bit of a cliff there when you go from uh, like I don't even like myself implementing authentication for projects like that, just because you said, because there's like a massive amount of information that you need to do just to do that correctly. So, and even as a new user, you kind of look for those opportunities to get going quickly, because those are the quick wins, as we call them, where you want to use a certain
Mhm.
service or a certain tool that gives you a certain set of functionality, so that you don't have to, so you can do that and kind of move on to the next thing. And that's kind of where Appwrite shines, is giving you some of those APIs and things that you can use quickly, but also being built on technology that's proven and out there, so that you're not necessarily having to relearn a new thing. It's, if you take apart the pieces, you'll find familiar territory there. So yeah.
Nice. Yeah. I do like that when, because I think one of the things that is maybe a criticism I've seen levied against Firebase is that Firebase feels a little magic. You install this SDK, you can't really look under the hood of the SDK too much because it's all kind of proprietary stuff. Um, and
Hmm.
it works, but you're like, I don't know why. Or like you decide that you want to make a small tweak to it, and then you can't because it's like it's all part of this sort of mystery box of software. And so I do like the idea of if the tool is open source, and open source doesn't always mean easy to work on, but I do like the idea that
Right.
you can at least go all the way into the package and figure out what's going on and how that all functions. Um, so I guess what what do you see as like the biggest hurdle to overcome? We're talking about this big cliff between first project and building something more ambitious like an app dashboard. Um, for a learner, how what do you see as the biggest hurdle, and how do you think they should what's a good way to start figuring out how to overcome that?
Hmm. Yeah, I think the biggest hurdle is most of the time is making the choice of which pieces are you going to put together in the puzzle. And because, like I said, with
Mm,
there's so many choices out there, frameworks, we can't any number of frameworks to choose from, any number of technologies to choose from. So there's definitely that hurdle there to get over, like that mental hurdle to get over there. um, and then, like I said, trying to find the tool that kind of fits what you want to achieve, and even like what you want to build today, and even like what you want to build later on. I think for new people, that is
mm,
a skill that you kind of have to learn. And you kind of have to learn that by trying uh, to work with new things, work with different things, and of course, open source has been, out there for forever. So it's always been there and available, but it's still, even just getting open source itself is a challenge that you have to, it takes something that it's a skill that you build over time, I guess what I'm trying to say. So like
Yeah.
picking the right tool, planning that out is something I would tell a new person to kind of hone in on, because that'll help you when trying to just build the right, pick the tools to build the right project.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. Um, and it actually dovetails pretty nicely into a question from the chat. Write a Code is asking, how do you plan a project? Like
Mm.
that's such a big question, right? So I think like for you specifically, you were talking about choosing tools and everything. Um,
Mhm.
how do you make what are the heuristics you're using, as a developer to choose between one tool or another and to limit the scope and make sure that you don't get into a situation where you're going to start this project and then realize, oh God, I don't have the 9 months I need to actually build this.
Yeah, I think, yeah, that's a good point. The things that I tend to lean towards are those things that I don't want to deal with, and that's usually
Mm,
relates to, like I said, if you're new, then you're going to want to like dive into everything, and then you kind of find out the things that you like to do versus the things you don't like to do. So when I'm picking a tool, it's usually I'm picking a tool that solves a problem that I don't want to deal with right now, or I'm not necessarily looking to drill in, like you said, 9 months to try to build up my
mhm.
own solution, or even whether I choose to run it on my own, computer, or run it somewhere else. I think those are, are choices that I look at. So it's time to ship is the biggest thing. There is how I go about trying to plan a project. Is like what am I trying to build? How long do I reasonably think it's going to take? Given the constraints that I have. And actually, kind of gave a talk on this recently also, where it was talking about like open source in general. Like, what things do you decisions do you make, whether with given time, certain amount of time constraints and resources, and like ramp up time, is all things that I kind of take
Mm.
into account when trying to plan a project, and think about the things that are going to impact like those timelines. If it's side project, you got there's always infinite time, but when you're trying to get something out the door, that definitely constrains you in a bit, in a way.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think I kind of have the same general approach of thinking about like how much time do I have and what do I need to eliminate from this project for me to finish in this,
Hmm.
I want to do this in a weekend. Okay, I'm probably not going to implement the full like rating and comment system that I had in my head in a weekend, right? So okay, scale it back, scale it back. What can I
Hmm.
actually do? Um, and I think that's also part of, are you trying to make this a business? Are you trying to learn? Are you trying to, teach yourself a new concept? Are you trying to like what's the goal of the thing you're trying to build, and then just scoping down appropriately so that if it's a business, like, yeah, put a little more into it. If it's a learning project, I don't know, maybe don't worry about the stuff you're not trying to learn. Like you don't have to get that part right. um
Hmm.
but yeah. So okay, so I think I have uh I have so many questions about Appwrite and how we get started, but I think it's actually going to be easier to just show how this works rather than tell. So why don't we jump on over into that view? All right, so here we go. We're over in the pair
All right.
programming view now, and I'm going to start by doing a quick shout out. We've got Rachel doing the live captioning today from White Coat Captioning. Thank you for being here. That is made possible through the support of our sponsors. We've got Netlify, NX, and Backlight all kicking in to make this show more accessible to more people, which means a lot to me. We are talking to Brandon Roberts. If you don't already follow Brandon, you should go and make that happen. Head over there.
Yeah, appreciate
And
that.
we are talking today about Appwrite. So let me drop link to Appwrite in there. And that is everything I know about what we're doing today. so
That's why
um,
I'm that's
so
why
if
I'm
I
here,
want to
so we
get
can
started,
drill in.
Ab- Absolutely. So what should I do first? What's my first step?
Yeah, so the first step to getting up and running with Appwrite is, I'll say the prerequisite is you need to have Docker installed on your local machine. So that's a step that you can, find through the Docker or the information on the Docker website to get that installed. So Docker lets you run containers on your machine there and in different services. And we'll just kind of you can share a link to that. I'm sure we'll have a link to that in the show in the chat here. But once you have that up and running, we'll then there's a command you can run through the Appwrite documentation. Now, um, I've gone through done some of this legwork already, so but we can show how do you have doc to the Appwrite homepage and find the command to run get Appwrite up and running on your machine if you have that there.
Okay, and I'm realizing I don't actually have Docker installed on this machine, so I'm furiously downloading it. And
Well, that's
um,
for show. Click on the Get Started there on the Appwrite homepage. We can show the command that you would need to run to get it running local. But yeah, I have an instance set up that we can use for today. So if you go up here on the started that button, click that, and it'll give you or the get started right there at the top there. It'll give you
get started.
yep, the dialog, and this is the Docker command will get written. It has the different commands
Nice,
for
nice,
your
nice.
particular operating system. So if you wanted to use that, you could. But like I said, we have one that we're gonna use for today that I already have up and running. So that and we and just a quick other item. We also have like one-click setups that we have on our documentation on our doc site also. So if you're wanting to try it out and not, like you said, install Docker on your local machine, then you can try those out also. And those will be under
Nice,
the
nice, nice.
installation docs. Yeah, yeah, because we're always looking for integration with other areas also.
Very cool. Yeah, so the Docker install and here's DigitalOcean, Gitpod. Yeah, very nice.
Hmm. Yeah, so always, like I said, the ability to self-host it is always there. But like I said, for those who don't want to run it on their own server or kind of have that maintenance side of things, you can run it, somewhere else.
Mhm. Nice. Okay,
Yeah,
so
so we can go to the I shared a link with you on the kind of instance that we have running here for Appwrite that we can take a look at. Yep. And this is just
okay, and
the
so
initial console. Yep.
and so this is the one that you're hosting this on your own project. So you've spun
Hmm.
this up and deployed it so that we don't have to run Docker on my machine today, which is probably a good thing because if I try to run Docker on top of OBS, on top of everything else we're doing, I think this thing's going to
Mm.
fall over on me. Um,
Yeah, so we definitely don't want that. So we want your machine to stay running smoothly for this. So yeah.
okay, great. So we're looking at an instance of Appwrite. So once you've gone through the steps of deploying to or setting up Docker or deploying DigitalOcean or whatever the process is, I'm going to be
Hmm.
looking at something like this. This is the Appwrite
Yeah.
console.
Yeah, once you initially install it, like I said, I've done a little bit of setup here, but you would set up a username and password as like your root account for the Appwrite
Gotcha.
instance, And after you get past that part with your username and password, then you come here to the dashboard where you can create projects for Appwrite itself.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay. So I'm assuming
Yep.
the first thing I want to do is create a project.
Yep. So yeah, we can create a project. So you can click the create project button, and there's a couple of options here. You can auto generate, like each entry project has its own unique ID, and you can generate a unique ID by just leaving the default there, or you can click the pencil there by the side of that uh, input box there and choose your own ID if you want to do it that way. So we can choose.
Nice.
We just enter vote for the unique ID for this project, and then for the name, you can just give it a description there as far as what you a plain text description of what the project is. So we can just call this learn with JSON or voting or whichever way also there.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Yeah, Jigga
after
Man. Brandon is a dev advocate for Appwrite. That's what we're learning about today. Now we're creating the project
so
down here.
yes, it should have created the project there after we click that. So you have to make sure. I said, yeah, we click create. So okay, I guess it just took a second there. So yeah, there's the list of projects, um, and this will be the live voting app project that we're going to look at today. So you can have as many of these projects within your Appwrite instance that, like I said, gives you these features and kind of functionality out of the box there. So with a few of those things being database and storage buckets, and also webhooks there and API keys. If you wanted to connect to Appwrite from another server, that's another good use case for it there. So, and then we support multiple platforms. It shows you some, like I said, these things that we're kind of looking at the console area or the project area here. And then when we get into the app part of things, we'll also see that. Yeah, so you can add different
Nice.
platforms. Yeah, so as like you said, as you mentioned before, if you're doing like a web SDK or um, even support for Android or iOS or even other frameworks that we don't necessarily have specific SDKs for. I think we have 12 SDKs so far. But yeah, even if you didn't want to use those,
Okay.
you can also roll it just with the REST APIs. But these are just some of the platforms that we support like out of the box.
Nice.
Yeah. So
Okay.
so next, yeah, we can look at we can create a web app here. And I think it already has one for local hosts there. Um,
It
so
does.
yeah,
Yeah.
for this one, yeah, and for this and what this um, local host or what this platform does is if you're building a web app, we want to avoid our nice friend cores that always tends to come up and bite us when we're trying to connect from one web app to like I said, an external service. So I usually you can add local hosts here so that they'll know to bridge that gap and not give you those cores errors. But yeah, what we
Got it.
normally
Got
do
it. Got
is
it.
go in
Okay.
and yeah, set that to localhost, or even if this were your own deployed application, you could use that too for that,
Got it.
and it'll just be the host name itself and just and the name for it, and then that'll, like I said, help that connection there.
Nice.
So yeah,
Okay. And so this
the
was
next,
already a web app.
yes, that was one that was already
Ah, I
there.
gotcha.
Yeah, so you can have multiple ones of these. Like I said, if you want to connect from different sites or different domains that you have hosted there, then that works also.
Gotcha. I understand. Okay. So I didn't need to create this one.
Right. You could, yeah, we could have just left the local host one there as it was.
Gotcha.
But yeah, we can. So next we can go into the database area here and look at the collections and create one of those that we'll need for
Okay.
the voting app here. And let's see, I already have. Let's see what's going on. Of course, we run into the. So we already have some ones here. Let's go back out to the top here, or if we click the plus at the top, let's create a new project because I think we got some left over in here. Yeah,
Oh,
so
like you
create a new
picked up
project.
the. Okay.
Yeah, it seemed like there maybe was some data that was previously in there. So we clean those out. But yeah, so you just
Gotcha.
created a new
Gotcha. Okay.
project,
Heading
right?
back to the
Yeah,
console here.
yeah, that way, and then
Here's
that
our
way
live
we can
build.
see down at the bottom. Yeah, so now we have an empty project there with a platform that we can add from scratch for a local host. Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
And then when I go to my
So now we're
database,
in there. Yeah, now we're in database and we don't have any collections there. So if we click on add collection, yeah, this is a kind of a similar thing. You can give a collection a name or have it be auto generated there. So if you want to just type in something that's more human readable, you're free to do that. And we'll use this later
okay.
in the application itself for that side of things. So
Okay.
yeah, you can
And
just
so
give
I,
that a
I saw
name.
kind of cheating ahead here. You had listed item and vote. And so
Yeah, we had
I'm assuming that's we have
items and votes.
the first one. So the items are going to be the things that we're voting on, and votes will be
Hmm.
when somebody says, I like this, they'll be voting for an item.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Right, so here is our thing, our items.
Yep.
And then,
So after you create a collection, then you can kind of choose the permissions that that collection has. Whether it be, you can have it to where you can have permissions for the entire collection itself, or just or each individual row. You can have row or document level permissions in there. And
mm,
these are pretty flexible in that way, in that you can, like I said, set them to be for a specific user or even a specific team, or different groups of people. However you want to group that functionality there.
yeah.
Yeah. So in the
Question from the chat. What database is this using under the hood?
Yeah, good question. It's using MariaDB under the hood right now, but it's part of that flexibility is that it doesn't just support MariaDB. We're working on support for
Okay.
Postgres, and also MongoDB support are actively being
Nice.
developed there. So if you wanted to use a different database solution, you could use that also.
Cool. Very cool. Um, all right. So do I need to set any permissions here, or does it kind of let us go
Uh,
free for all by default?
yeah, we can. No, actually, you do have to set some permission. So because each out of the box, you do have to authenticate to you to access any of this data. So for this particular one, we're going to set the permission in the box to role and colon member in both of those for read access and write access. And like I said, you can, if you wanted to make this more granular, you could, but we'll use role and member. And role is kind of a reserved keyword for that, and member just means any authenticated user. And there's other conventions
Okay.
there. There's also a link there that people can visit more to learn more about how to do that side of more about the permissions and how you can set them for different groups or teams and that. So, but yes, if
Gotcha.
we'll go
Gotcha.
down
Gotcha.
to after we had that, we can scroll down some and click update to update the permissions there. So now those permissions
Okay.
will be set for the items, and then we can, I believe that's, and then next we'll go into the attributes. because that's where we'll. This is where you'll kind of model out the things that you want to store there. And there are some of the attributes that we have out of the box here that you can define, and it's pretty said a good selection of choices there that we'll choose for that. So we'll go to the string attribute there for the items. And sorry, I was looking at here. I'm trying to see which one we got going here. Okay, so this is for the items, correct?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So for this one, we can we'll use a string attribute, and we'll name the string image or image URL for that side of things. And this will be just one word, and then we'll say it can. Oh, sorry, we can cancel this one, and we'll use a URL attribute instead to kind of match the
Okay.
what we want to put in there. It'll be image URL, and we'll set it
Is
to
this like what
required.
I'm gonna? And this is what I'm going to like call from the API. So I want to name it like a variable.
Yes, yeah. This is well the
Gotcha.
this is the collection. The items will be the collection, and this will just be one of the fields in that collection that will list out in the app itself.
Gotcha. Okay. So create that one.
Yeah. So we have
And then do I need any
that
others?
one there, and then no, I think that'll be good for this one for the items, and we can
Okay.
go ahead and add some add some entries to that database there. So if we go to add document there, let's see, I may have to send you a link here just for I just chose some stub images that we can use for that.
Okay.
So I sent one of those over, and uh, we'll just create two or three of these and use kind of a different seed value for this one, because this particular service just,
Oh,
like I
so
said,
this just
generates
grabs.
random. Yeah, it just
Oh,
generates a
cool. Okay.
random.
So
Yeah, so that way we can just use that to display the list of things that we'll vote on. And like I said, we could have put any image in there. We could
wait,
put
am I
GitHub
doing
URLs in there.
putting in different values and it's
It may
giving me
have.
the same?
Yeah, you have to choose. If you put in a different value for the seed, it'll give you a different image. The Appwrite
Just,
one is the seed value. Yeah, so if you
oh, I
change
got
that
you. I
value,
got you.
then
I got you.
it'll generate you
I
another
understand.
image.
All right.
Yeah, yeah,
Let me add a few of these here. So we'll get one.
yeah. We can go ahead and create, like I said, about 2 or 3 of those,
Okay.
and that would just brings you to the edit document there, and
Okay. So
we
we'll add
can,
another one.
yeah,
We'll call this one 2. And let's add one more.
yeah. That one more will work. That way, we'll just have a good set of images to vote on there for that. Okay,
Great.
so I
Okay. So
think
we've got,
we're good on. Yeah, so we got 3 documents there. Yeah, so next we can create another. We'll go back to the database and create one more collection for the votes. Like I said, the same kind of deal here. We can add votes and give it a name, and then we'll go through and add or set up the permissions for that collection, which can be the same as what we added before. And yeah, so role member, and then we can update that, and then we can go to attributes and add a couple of fields there, and we just use a couple of string attributes for here, just for tracking the particular votes. So the first one would be, we can call this one the item ID, just so we're just trying to use it as a reference, kind of a reference field for the other the one that for the items table, and yeah, we can do that as required.
Okay.
And then after that one, we'll add another string attribute for the user ID, and this will just be the user that is logged in for the vote there, and that can be required also.
Okay.
And then we'll create, and then we'll excuse me, create those two. And that'll be it for as far as our collection goes. We got items and we got votes to kind of track the votes there. And now I believe we can switch over to the app side of things and look at how we can use this data to submit a vote for one of those particular images.
Yeah, let's do it.
So I believe we can use this to, I created a sample project here that I sent over, so we can clone that project to get that up and running, which is pretty straightforward React application that we can clone for this.
Okay. Do you have the link
And
to
let me
that
see.
handy so I can drop it in the?
Yeah, sure. Let's see. And copy that. I'll drop that link there.
All right.
So we can drop it in the chat there. And that'll be the like I said, the app we'll use to get up and running here. And we'll also
Okay,
make
so
that
I'm going to just fork this over to Learn with Jason.
Mm-hmm.
And then
like I said,
we'll
this is
start.
once we get to here, we'll, like I said, it's just a pretty straightforward skeleton app where we can clone and get up and running. And if eventually, like I said, you could end up deploying this to Netlify if you wanted to. That way other people could access it. But yeah, we can roll with that either way.
Yeah, let's see how fast we can get out there. And let me see. Let's open this up. No, wait. I'm gonna get a init. Already init. So we can open this. All right.
Yeah, so you can
Let's make that a little bit bigger.
use Yarn. Well, I guess I'm not sure what your preference is for Yarn or npm, but can use Yarn to install the dependencies there.
Okay. Yeah, we've got a yarn lock, so I'll use yarn. And then let's poke into the package JSON here a little bit. All right, so this is a Vite project. We're using React. You've got the Appwrite SDK installed here. Pretty.
Yeah, and like I mentioned before, we have SDKs for different platforms, and the web SDK gives you a library you can use with Appwrite in your web app. So yeah, just had that installed there so we can use that here.
Nice. Okay, and so I should then be able to run yarn dev, and this will start our project up.
Mm-hmm.
Let's head over here, open it up, and now we've got the basic setup here. Now, am I safe to assume that this doesn't work yet? We got to go in and add the pieces?
Yes, yes, that's correct.
Cool. Okay, so let's poke in the source code a little bit here and just get our feet under us. So we've got the standard main.jsx that we get out of a Vite. Looks like nothing particularly out of the ordinary is in here.
Yep.
So then let's see.
Yeah, we got two components in this app, one for the login page and then one for the vote there. And And like I said, pretty straightforward setup there with React Router and some CSS for styles and things. So
And so this is the one we're looking at right now, which is that login form that has
mhm.
nothing hooked up to it yet. Then we've got this vote form, which it looks like we're
Yeah, we have
expecting
some.
eventually to get all of our items and whether or not we voted on them.
Yes, it's correct. So yeah, just some pretty stub HTML in there that we can use there. So yeah, if we want, the first thing we'll want to do is connect Appwrite to the project that we created in the Appwrite instance. So if we
Mhm.
go under the source folder, we can create a file. Yeah, in the project itself, we can create a file called API.ts.
Okay.
And this will just use the Appwrite Web SDK to set up that connection. So if we want to import the import Appwrite from the Appwrite package, and it'll be as a object import with the brackets, and then it'll be an uppercase Appwrite from there. Yep, update and Appwrite.
Got it?
Yep, yep. So next we want to set up the endpoint that we'll connect to. We can do this through creating an instance of Appwrite itself. So we'll export a const we can name it API and set that equal to new Appwrite, a new instance of Appwrite, and we don't have to pass anything to that itself.
Great.
Yep. Okay. So next we'll set the endpoint so we can use the API dot set endpoint method to tell it where to connect to, basically. And here we're going to use the one that we already have up and running here, and I will send you a link to that in the chat here.
Do we find that in here? Like if we're looking for one of these?
I Yes, that's correct. If you go to the project and go to the settings, um, if you click on the settings icon there under the project name, or sorry, there at the top, if you go to the home there, yeah, you'll see the endpoint API endpoint. You can click on that and copy that into the project. Yes.
Nice.
Yep. So we
Okay.
can just use that one. And the next thing we'll do is set the project ID, which is the same one that we entered before to create when we created the project. And I know we did this a couple of times. So, but the project ID is there also right above uh, the
Yeah,
API
just
endpoint.
got it. Got it. Okay.
Yeah. So
And
if we go to the
you'll have
next
to
line,
okay.
yeah, and do API dot
And
set
then
project,
okay.
and
And
then
drop that
use
in
that
there.
ID there. Yes. So that
Gotcha.
essentially there is what we need to connect Appwrite to to be able to start using the SDK in our web SDK in your application itself. Is just to set up an endpoint and set up a project. Now you could also use it if you want to use it on the server. Like I said, you could set an API key, but we'll just stick with that API for here for now.
Okay.
So next, we can go to the login form. And the login form is what we're just used to authenticate we'll just use an anonymous authentication here, which is supported by but supported by Appwrite. So we already have the login method here, which you're just using kind of like standard, I guess, React syntax here. So the next thing we want to do is to create a session for the user. Um, and these are just a note here, these are promise-based APIs. So if we wanted to use async await, we could use that with these. So what we're going to use here is API dot, well, create a session. We'll create a session variable and then store the results of this in that variable. So create a session, and we can use await, and then API dot account, and then create anonymous session. And we kind of see some of the other create anonymous session should be there at the top. And you can just call that one.
Yeah,
And
so we can use a JOT, magic URL, OAuth 2.
mhm.
That's nice that you've got that flexibility in there.
Right. And the next thing we want to do is to set the user, and I'll have a callback there to set user, and we want to pass that session to the set user function there that was passed into the component. And that just, like I said, some of that part was set up already so that we can have that set at the top level in case you were wanting to like wrap your entire application in some setup, some logic there to do that. Yep.
Right. And so just to walk through this really quickly, we're using standard React state. We have an empty user to start. And if there's a user, we show this vote component. Otherwise, we show the login. I guess we show the login form no matter what.
Yeah, if you go to the home page, it'll show the login form, and then we can use that to log in there. And we can add the if, like I say, if you wanted to have a user effect there in the app component to check whether that user's already logged in, then we could use the API. We can use that API there also. So when we get to
Gotcha. Okay.
to the vote page.
Cool.
Yeah. So after after we set up the login with the anonymous session, then we can navigate to we can use that navigate to the vote page.
Let's see, navigate.
Yeah, we can use navigate to slash vote there. Yep.
Great.
So yeah, so essentially that's what we would need to connect the anonymous authentication method from Appwrite to our application itself.
And so theoretically speaking, we can let's console log this session and let's just give this a try, right? Like we're here, we should be set up. I'm going to go to my console and I'm just going to put in a name and log in. And we get
and that will bring us to the Yep, and we could
wow, yeah, and it's got all sorts of cool stuff. So it can show what browser I'm using.
Yep.
That's nice. Cool. Okay, I got you.
Yeah, it definitely has a lot of that information out of the box there. One thing we could do is also capture the name, because like I said, we're using an anonymous authentication there, but if we wanted to update the name, we can go and do that also. But we can use that how it is for that part now. So yeah, so after we log in, we navigate to the vote page, so we know we have credentials there. And like I said, if we need to wire it up more with like a user effect in the app component to check whether we're already logged in, we can set that user when the app starts up.
Yeah. And so we can, if we have time, we can go in and do that. But I think for now, I just want to okay, so we've shown authentication, which this is pretty excellent that it's that quick, right? And I know we're using anonymous auth, and so chat don't get too up in arms about that. But the speed with which we were able to just quickly set up the basics of authentication to just sort of prove the point, right, is really fantastic. And now we're looking at a vote page that you need to be logged in to see. So if I go in here, there's probably something I can clear in my my session that'll get rid of all the things. I don't know
Yeah, if you
exactly
go
where it
under
would be, but
the,
it'll
well,
be
you can
somewhere in here,
actually
right?
do this in the, yeah, we can actually do this in the console itself, in the Appwrite console. If we go back there
Oh, nice.
and you go to users, and you can see that you'll be logged in. You'll have a user that's logged in there. You can click on that particular name that you used to log in or for that account, and it actually log that person uh, out of that particular session. So if you go under activity, I believe it is there, or sorry, maybe under sessions. Um,
Mm.
yeah, you can actually click the log out button to clear that session, and then that person will be no longer logged in if they try to access or try to use that, like I said, get method there, and it'll be cleared for that. And so now we don't have
And see, now that
a
we're not logged in, it won't let me see the thing. I go here, log in again. Now I can see the thing again. So that's, I mean, it's just nice, right? Like it's nice to be able to prototype something like this out. We're not dealing with any super secret information. We just want to show how it works. So you
Mhm.
can see the power, Chad, I hope, of how fast you could prototype something using Appwrite, given that we're less than 30 minutes into this and we've already built a full login flow for this app.
Yeah, definitely. And like I said, I don't. I'm one of those I would use off before, and I'm glad that there are things like the Appwrite handles this for me, so I don't have to, so I can move on to the next thing.
Yes. Okay. So I
Yeah. So
think
if,
the next thing, speaking of which, is going to be to load these items in.
yes. So if we go back into um, the vote component here from Appwrite, and in here
Okay.
is, like I said, is where we will load in the items from the collection there, and we can do this with a use effect um, that takes a callback there. And if you open that up, yeah, just an empty array. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward there. And we can use the API again. And like I said, you can use async await here in the use effect, or whichever, I guess whatever your preference is there. Or sorry, if we use
Okay.
the put the async on the use effect itself, or yeah, whichever way you
Does
want to do
that
it,
work?
that'll
I
work.
thought it doesn't it yell at you when you put an async on this one?
I think it depends. It may not yell at you here, but if it does, then uh we can work with that. So yeah, the
Okay.
if you use the items equals API, and then we have the dot database um, property here that we can use to query items from the database. And like I said, we have multiple ones here. Basically, CRUD operations that you can use to get documents, and these match up with what we modeled in the collection there. And so the collection ID will be the one that we entered in, that we
And I
entered
need to
in
go.
entered in there. Yeah, so we go to database and
And
items,
we picked
and
item.
you can find that
So
under
I need to change this to,
settings. Yep,
oh, it's under settings too.
that
Okay,
works
yeah.
there.
Collection ID is
Yeah,
item.
so
There's my copy paste.
yep, so we have the items there, and then we can set and then it'll give us two things. It'll give us documents, and it'll give us a count of those items in there. So you can use items.documents to set that to the array there. And we may have to modify
Nice.
I guess depending on what we name if we scroll down a little bit in to the HTML there, uh, there will be an image.
Let's
Should
see.
be an image anchor tag there. There it is. So
Image
image
URL.
source.
Let me
Yeah, we just have to update that to
make that
match
into what I
the
called it.
yeah, what we had there. And I think
Okay.
the other parts are there already.
All right.
So
Let's
so
try
yeah,
this and
use
see what
effect
we got.
Hey, look at that.
Nice. Nice and easy.
Yeah, so we were able to, like I said, list the documents from our items and bring those in, just querying those from the API. And you can also uh, have more specific queries. You don't have to get all the documents every time. So that's there also, but that's just part of the additional API that we can use for that.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. So
so
we've got we go ahead.
oh no, that was it. That was it. Yeah,
Okay.
so we
So it
got
looks
the
like from
list
here
of
then we've
images
got
here.
uh-huh. And the list of images is going to give us we have to choose one of these, and then once we've chosen
Yeah,
one, we're going to vote on it.
we're gonna click on one of those and then have the vote. So we already have the items loaded there. So select to select the one that we want to click on, we just need to add a click handler to the image itself to set that.
Okay.
So if we just go down to the image and add an on click, and we have the callback there, and we can use the set selected to the item, and it'll be the item dollar ID. Yeah, that'll work. So that should
Okay.
match there. And this is, like I
So
said, just to kind of connect the things there from when we actually click on the item to select it.
mhm. And it looks like it's got a class name for selected. So
Hmm.
the item ID, if the item ID equals selected, which now we're setting that. So theoretically speaking, we should see the UI kick in here. So I'm going to reload.
We may need to.
Did I break it?
Well, it's probably because we don't have the effect in the app to set the user when like when you reload the page there.
Oh,
So it's probably still
right. That's right.
keyed off of that. So let's go back to. I'll say we can probably tweak this really quickly. If we go back to the app component in the application itself, and we'll just add a use effect here, and then add the use the API API import. Yep, that can be just simple there. Use API dot account uh, API account dot get, and then that will give you the current user if they're logged in, current user if they're logged in or not. And
Nice.
we can use yeah, we can do the same thing here. We have the uh, use the await or a dot then or whichever that'll be a promise that's returned by the dot get. So whatever the result of that is, we can set that to the user, set the user to the result of the data that comes back from that. So after that, yeah, we can just set user from the account.get. And do we need to,
Okay.
I was
Let
gonna
me
say we
see
may
if the
need to put
function.
in a wait in front of the API for that.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, there we go.
All right. So now we've got
Okay.
the account is loading. And so theoretically speaking, then when I go to vote, shows up. All right. It
Yeah.
does what
And
I
now
want.
we're,
And now when I click, I get my selected
yeah, now we can
item.
yeah, but now it's just like I said, the kind of the way we had it set up to where the user had to be set, like we said when we refresh the page, if you wanted to have that wrap your entire application there.
Yeah.
So yeah, now so we got our items loaded here. So now we can actually go on to actually vote on one of the items once it after we have it selected there.
Okay.
Uh,
So we
so
need to figure out.
yeah, so we have the submit here and the vote function there that's just kind of stubbed out that doesn't have anything in there, and we can use that to submit the vote to the collection for that particular item. So for here, we can grab we can actually use the API again to create a document for this. So if we use the API, um, we'll use the API that, like I said, it has methods on it to create and work with documents. So we can use api.database here and create a document. And this will give us a collection to work with, but this will be, yep, the votes that we want to use. Like I said, you can always find, if you generated a random ID or unique ID for the collection, you can always go into the console and figure out what that is. And then the document ID is going to be the unique ID for that particular record. So in this case, we'll have we can use, and we also have like a predefined string that you can use here called unique.
Okay.
So if we add a string here and use the word unique with like you're calling the unique function, you can use that inside that string there. Yeah, so
Okay.
that just signals Appwrite that it should generate a unique ID auto generate a unique ID for you for the data that we're going to enter there. Yeah, so then the item
And then if I
ID is
remember
going to
correctly,
be, yep,
selected, right?
yes, we got the selected one that you set when you click on the particular item there. And then the user ID is information that we don't have yet in this particular, well, actually we do have the user, yep, dollar
Because we
ID. That's
passed it in,
correct.
right? So,
Yep.
okay, so we've got our user. And so this should do the thing, right? This will,
Yeah, as
do we
far
need
as
anything else here?
yeah, submitting an item, uh no, I don't think so. For as far as creating a document, we should be good there. As long as we like of course, you name the fields correctly or to match the data that we have in the votes table, we
The
can
10,000 foot if.
let's try it out and submit it. Yeah,
All
we can
right,
try
let's
it
do
out.
this. Okay, so I'm going back here. I'm going to vote for this one. And let's go see if it happened.
Yeah, so we go to votes. We may just have to reload the page there. Yeah, so now we have the that's always is that the the I got this done quickly dance here got
Yeah.
going on there.
The first try dance. You just gotta first
I
try.
see. I see. Cool. So yeah, that is, like I said, we talked kind of covered going through the voting, how you can connect to the database and submit items to the collection there. So of course, there's many different ways you can like play around with how you handling like the vote itself and that sort of thing. But as far as like a baseline, we have the items that we want to list, and we can vote on a particular item. Uh, so
Mhm.
the next part about it is that we can look into is adding some real time data uh, to this. But I guess we can maybe inspect if you haven't want to poke into that some more, or how we got here, I guess.
Well, I feel like we're at the most exciting part to me of these SDKs like Appwrite is how
Mhm.
quickly it makes it possible for us to not only prototype but get that real time stuff in there. So I'm pretty excited to give this a try and get some real time voting in, because if we get that, then I can actually deploy this and we can let the chat go and vote.
Yes, sure. Let's do it. Yeah, so the next part we'll do is kind of hook up the real time part of the voting. So we can we have an API for that, so we can put that in a use effect here outside of the rest
Okay.
of the voting area. or
Okay,
the
let's
vote
get the
component,
use
excuse me. So we have
effect.
a use effect here, and we can open that up, empty array. And what we want to do here is subscribe to the API that that Appwrite provides to listen to collections. So just at kind of at a high level, Appwrite, all like you said, all these kind of system events are going on. All these kind of events are going on, and we can actually listen to those events using the .subscribe method here.
And I'm noticing I always appreciate it whenever a tool is well typed because I've been able to auto complete
Hmm.
my way to success here. Like, I know you're here guiding, which is why this is working so well. But it's nice because
Hmm.
you're not having to like spell things for me or say like, oh yeah, no, you got to use this method instead of that method. You point me in the right direction. I can dot autocomplete
Yeah.
through most of the code, which is such a nice feature of well typed SDKs.
Yeah, definitely. All the web SDK is definitely has all the types for, like I said, all the REST APIs, all the things that you would normally interact with. So definitely aid you there. So yeah, I definitely like using that as opposed to hitting the REST APIs yourself. Like I said, which you could do, but when you want that autocomplete, definitely a bonus for
Hmm.
that. So
For
for
sure.
the
Okay,
subscribe
so
for the subscribe here, we'll have the things that we want to listen to next.
it's just the collection name.
Yes, and this could be one or well, actually, there is a structure to the thing that you want to listen to, and it's kind of modeled after the things that we kind of talked about earlier. So it'll be collections dot and then a collection name and then documents. So collections, I believe in this case you named it votes, yep, and then documents.
Mhm.
So then that'll be the first argument there. And like I said, it could be one or many things there. And then the next one will be the callback that has the data for that particular event. So that'll be we'll have data there. And then each time something gets emitted, this callback function will be called with that particular event that happened there.
Nice.
So yeah, and these, like I said, we have documentation on all the kind of events that happen and the way you can kind of structure those. Um, so so what we want to do is actually listen for when a new vote comes in, and that'll be a particular event that we can model here. So if we choose the add a if case here for a data dot event, and then set that equal to uh, database. It'll be equal to the event will be a string. So we set it to database dot documents dot create there.
Okay, so sorry, database dot documents dot create.
Yes, and that'll just be the kind of the signal whenever the uh, votes notification there.
Uh, I think I just had an audio blip and I lost you for a second. The last I heard was you said database.documents.create, and then I'm not sure if this is actually correct.
Yes, that's correct. We just need to get
Okay.
whenever a new document, a new vote is added to the database, and that's what we'll get for the item there.
Okay.
So
And
next,
so the
we'll want,
item,
yeah, we'll want to set up the votes here, and I think there should be, I think, is this Copilot? I think Copilot is already setting up what we want to do here because it
it gets
knows the
very
things.
helpful.
uh, but yes, what we want to do is update the votes object that was defined there up top with the latest ones that come in. So we'll have to use the callback for the votes there, and So the callback will give us the current votes, and then we'll want to update that with the one that came in.
Okay, so we'll do
old
old votes and then data dot.
Well, the data dot
Just like data dot
payload,
document.
the one that we want to update is the item ID. So it'll be like data dot payload. I believe it'll be item ID, and then we'll want to update that item in the key there, or that'll be a key that we'll need to update there. So this will be individual updates. Yeah. So
Gotcha.
if that record exists, then we want to increment it by one. But if it doesn't, then we want to set it to
Oh,
one. Yeah.
Okay. So then I'm jumping the gun here. And so what we want to do is we've got our old votes, and then
Yeah. Well.
let's see
Yeah.
if
We'll create. You can
old
create.
votes.
Yeah. If old votes data dot
Can I?
payload item ID. Yeah. If that's there, then we'll just increment that value by one.
Load item ID, and then we're just gonna set it to be plus plus. Otherwise,
And then otherwise,
we
we'll
will
just set it
say
to.
old
Yeah, old items.
data
Then we can use the
payload.
data dot payload item ID equals one, because that'll, assuming that's the first one that comes in there. But like I said, we want to show how that we can get this data in real time in that way.
Yeah. Okay. So that did I? That feels right. Am I right?
Yeah, I think you have the equal and the plus here, but that's, yeah, I think that should work.
Okay. Is that right? Should I just like plus equals one this?
Yeah, I think that will work. Yeah, I think that works also. Just plus
It might
equal
be
one.
less
So we'll
complicated than what I was doing. So okay.
Yeah, and then
Okay.
the subscribe method does return an unsubscribe. So if we wanted to like clean up this subscription after you exit this component, because that's usually a good thing to do, we can just store that in a variable there, and then just return the callback. And it just calls that function to. If you call that function, it'll just unsubscribe from that live connection there.
Okay.
Yeah. So I believe so that'll give us the data that comes in in real time as far as votes are, and then we'll need to display that in the UI somewhere. So we can add we have vote
Or
count there, so we can use votes and then use the item ID for that particular one, or have it be 0 if there haven't been any votes in yet.
okay. So theoretically, assuming I didn't typo anything, that should work, but it's not loading yet because we don't do the initial load of votes. Is that right?
Right. Right. We would need to, yeah, we could go and fetch the initial set of votes also, and load those in um, before we set the items or yeah, pull the votes and then set those also, if we want it to be like whatever the current counts are before you start
You know what?
voting there.
I'm not gonna stress about that right now because we have like 10 minutes. So I actually
Hmm.
just want to deploy this so that we
Okay.
can let the chat go vote on it. And so let's see, where am I at? I'm going to go add everything. So we'll get commit and say live voting should be working. Let's push.
Yeah, we'll see how many ones we like I said, if everything works, then we'll get some people to interact with the voting. So in real time, of course.
For sure. All right, let's do this. I'm going to add a new site. I want to
this is what you see every time you go into the dashboard, huh?
All right, we're going into Learn with Jason, and then this was called, what was this one called? Appwrite. Got like 300 repos in there now, so now it's nice and slow for me. And then we're gonna, let's see, yarn build. That looks right. So let's deploy the site.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's Vite, this should go real fast for us.
Yep. Everything is fine with build there.
Mm-hmm.
And we can get this.
And we didn't have any environment variables or anything because we just needed the project, which is all public data. We don't need to keep that secret.
Mm-hmm. And like I said, you could, if you wanted to, you could set those, put those in environment variables, and when you deploy, of course, you have those in Netlify for the project ID and the prod URL versus development URL. So yeah, all that's there.
Shout out to Vite for putting together a build system that's so fast that a cold boot, like first try, runs that dang fast. All right, so here is our public voting app. Let me throw this to the chat. Chat, go vote. So I'm gonna head in. I need to click this button.
Oh, I think one thing we will need to add, we're probably going to get need to add we're probably going to get bit by our buddy Cores again here. So we just need to add the host name to the platform there you can just add another web app, and you don't have to put the whole fully qualified. They just put the host. Yep. And that way we'll be able to connect to it.
All right, let's try that again. Still yelling at me? Not create an anonymous user when logged in. So I should already be logged in, which should mean that I can just go to vote. And I can.
Yep.
And look, it's already happening. People are voting. Where are you at, chat? Get in there.
Thanks, chat. I appreciate you.
And let's see. I'm also, I want to kind of watch the real-time connection here, which should be
yeah, and it's just
somewhere.
a standard WebSocket connection underneath there. And like I said, all these are available without the API, the Web SDK API. So if you wanted to connect to them directly, you could also do that, or build your own thing on top of that.
If you're getting that, cannot create an anonymous user when logged in, head over to /vote. We didn't put in the redirect or anything. Yeah. We just wanted to give that a shot. So if you're getting that error, just go to /vote. If you hit /vote and it's blank, you need to log in. But so this should be showing us some messages, and you can see them coming in here. Lots of events coming in. Type event, document create. So I think I might have made a mistake in what we're watching to update things. Um,
Oh, okay.
but this is pretty slick. Like we're seeing the events come in. I clearly screwed something up because we're not seeing the counts update live, but you can kind of see just the immediate power of how this works.
Hmm.
Without having to, like, I don't know about y'all, chat, but I've tried to set up WebSocket before and build my own like server side WebSocket event emitter and all those things. You can actually see it if you run the commands on the show. Like you give it one of these, right?
Hmm.
This here is me writing my own little stand-up thing to make this all function. It's really challenging to get that to work, and I still feel like the thing I built only works about half the time. Um, so how nice is it that this just works right out of the box? And the part that broke is my code where I'm trying to parse this data and get that all plugged in together. So something that we
Hmm.
can fix pretty quickly. I imagine Brandon I think has this built up in a way that actually functions. So we can also link to the working code.
Yeah, there's definitely a branch, which I'll give credit to you. I'm pretty sure it's just a small tweak or something, but yes, there is a branch on the GitHub repo where you can see the full working solution there.
Yeah, really, really, really nice stuff going on here. So if we go back to this one, so this is Brandon's version, and then we've got a complete version that you can go and look at. So let me drop
Yep.
this in here for y'all. Um, okay, so I mean, this, like, my buggy code aside, this is pretty dang impressive how quickly we were able to make that work. Oh, look at that. Okay, so I think what I did is I somehow got it to only update when you click on a thing to vote, because it stayed 0
Oh,
until I
okay.
selected, and then it showed one. So I've got a bug in there, and it's something that sounds like we could go figure out. But regardless, we
Yep.
were able to build something that is actually working. It's doing what we want. Just got to fix our UI because you let me write a UI. What did you expect? Brennan, for folks who want to go further with this and try more, what resources do you recommend?
Yeah, so definitely check out the documentation at our website, and I'll drop that in here so we can share it in the chat for Appwrite.io. Yep, you already got the page up there, so we can check that out, and that'll be the main place that you can see for documentation on all our APIs. We also have a Discord, which it's linked there from the site there. Discord, definitely check us out on GitHub, uh, as we have a growing community there. Discord, Twitter, um, and GitHub, like I said, are the places that we frequent, and we're always around. So you can definitely check us out there for that.
Great. All right, y'all. Well, this has been an absolute blast. If you're not already following Brandon, you should go and do that for sure. And let me just give one more shout out to our sponsors. We've had Netlify, NX, and Backlight all kicking in to make this show possible, and that includes the captioning, which is done by Rachel today from Whitecoat Captioning. Thank you, Rachel, for being here.
Mhm.
While you're checking out things on the site, make sure you go and give a look at the schedule. We've got a lot of really good stuff coming up. We are going to build an ES build plugin next Friday, so it's a different day. I'm traveling next week. We're working on something cool at Netlify. More details on that later. But I'm going to move the episode to Friday, and that's going to be with Chance from the Remix team. We're going to build an ES build plugin. I think that's going to be an absolute blast. Make sure you go over and either add on Google Calendar or use this follow on Twitch button to make sure that you get updated whenever a new episode is going live. You can also subscribe on YouTube if you prefer to watch these after the fact. But I do appreciate y'all who show up live. It's much more fun when we've got somebody to talk to. With that, we're going to call
Yeah,
this
of
one a
course.
success. Brandon, any parting words for the chat?
Yeah, I do want to give one quick plug here. We just raised our Series A, so definitely want to celebrate that. But yeah, thanks to all the chat for coming through. And like I said, you can find a link to that on our site also about that. So we're hoping to do some exciting things there with open source and continue that. So thanks for having me though. Yeah.
Yeah, congrats on the round. Thank you so much for showing up today. This was an absolute blast. Chat, stay tuned. We're going to go find somebody to raid. And by the time you come back next time, I'm going to figure out what the heck was wrong with my audio and hopefully be moved into my new office. So thank you all so much for hanging out. We will see you next time.
See ya.